Welcome to the Daily Dawg Podcast. Today is episode 47, and we are reacting to and having a lot of fun and excitement. Horns down, baby, after the big win against Texas yesterday in Sanford Stadium. Big matchup between number 5 Georgia and number 10 Texas. Went just about as good as we possibly could have hoped, right? In fact, it was Georgia's second largest win of the season and our largest win against a Power 5 program. Last week or the week before, our win against Mississippi State, obviously we won 41-20, so that was a 20-point win, but 35-10 was a nice 25-point beatdown. And all of a sudden, I think we have the answer to the question that I was talking about and asking in the last podcast, or on the last two podcasts. We said, look, it definitely looked like Georgia was rounding into form, starting to look like the Georgia team that we are used to seeing, but also the question that we've been asking all season, is this the Georgia team that's going to grow and develop and be bigger and better than what we saw it was at the beginning of the season? Is this the team that could grow into a championship team? So I think we have some answers. First and foremost, when looking back at the Mississippi State game, was Mississippi State just not that good? And Georgia exposed the fact that even though Mississippi State had a lot of respect coming into that game as a team that was improving, had a tough offense, and a lot of people said could be a trap game for Georgia, had played everybody they'd played tough, had a they had a 5-4 record coming into the game, and Georgia was only like a 7 to 9 point favorite in that game. So State was getting national respect. The question was that sort of fool's gold, or was Georgia, by beating down State in a way that no other team actually had so far that season, including Texas and Florida and some other teams, was State really was State that good a team? Or was Georgia that good a team, or was State really just not up to snuff? And we know We know that State is not quite up to the talent level, but actually on talent index, State's a top 30 team on talent index. So actually, now that we look at it, we look at context, and again, I made some points coming in this game. Maybe Texas really isn't quite the number 10 team or the team they look like on paper. I said that in the last podcast, that I thought we would win, and I said I thought we'd win by as much as 2 scores. I think I kind of hedged around a little bit. My final predictions, I was bouncing. I told you that I thought there was a 35% chance that Georgia could blow Texas out, and blowout being a 3-score or better game. And but I kind of stuck to that the 60% chance was that it would be a 1 or 2 score game, and I really thought Georgia would win by at least 10 to 14 points. And I kind of rounded out my prediction saying I thought that Georgia would end up winning, say, 34 to 21. So I expected actually Texas to do a little better offensively in this game than they did. So credit to the Georgia defense. And a lot of what I saw there was just looking inside the numbers. I mean, there's no doubt that Texas is on the talent index. They're probably the number 4 team in the country on talent index. They've certainly recruited well. There's a lot going on for Texas, so they are clearly a good team, and they are playing a little bit of a tougher schedule this year than they played the last couple years when they got to their 12 and 13 win seasons. So they were probably always going to struggle a little more, and especially having to play, of course, they lost the game with Georgia at home last year, but on paper, they had their toughest games at home, on top of not playing, say, Alabama last year or LSU or some of the other traditional top teams in the SEC. It felt like Texas's main objective was to get through the Georgia game, get through a decent SEC schedule, and that's kind of what they did. They got through last year where they only lost to Georgia, made it to the SEC championship game, lost a close game to Georgia again, but still, we're a playoff team. They won 2 games in the playoff, got to 13 wins. They were in the semifinals in the playoff, and they came into this season as a number 1 team. Looking at how they played so far in the season, I feel like there was some holes. They defense, which is credited as being maybe one of the best defenses in the country, really has not put up in SEC competition. We talked about they had not been putting up the kind of numbers overall, or like their overall numbers had been a lot less in SEC competition. And SEC competition so far this year for Texas hasn't just been a gauntlet of they haven't played A&M, they haven't played Alabama, they now have played Georgia, but they haven't played Ole Miss. So it's not like they've necessarily gone through and played all the top SEC teams this year. But still, So they had played Florida, of course, and they lost to Florida. They did play Mississippi State on the road, and that was a tough game for them. They played Kentucky on the road, and that was a tough game for them. But so they played an SEC schedule, okay. And all of those teams have NFL talent on them. All of those teams are top 50 teams in terms of talent index and what their potential is. What are they as far as wins and losses, and what are they as far as top teams in the country? Well, they're not necessarily all top 10, top 15 teams. But, Texas is, they've had a reasonable schedule. But when you looked at the numbers offensively, and we know that they've been a disappointment on offense. And I think, unfortunately, like we talked about, a lot of that has really fallen on the shoulders of Arch. And probably he was given too much hype early on and too much blame. And I'll tell you again, in this game, I think it would be easy to assign a lot of blame. Arch definitely missed some throws. He had some bad targets, missed a few throws here and there, but there was a bunch of throws he put right on people's hands, and his receivers weren't able to catch up to him. Now, some of them made up. Wingo, who's a fantastically talented guy, right? I mean, that is a dangerous player. You talk about talent. Here's a guy who's 6'1", 6'2", lightning fast speed, big body, gets open, knows how to run routes. He was having a little trouble getting balls in his hands and catching them early in the game, but he made up for it late in the game, had really a tremendous game. I mean, let me see. I'll just tell you what he did overall. Let me just pull up the box score real quick and take a look. So Wingo ends up... he had 2 carries for no yards running the ball. He had 9 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. So not explosive on the catches. DeAndre Moore had more yards on less, had more yards per catch, and so did Mosley. Mosley had 66 yards on just 3 catches, so he averaged 22 yards a catch. So, but Wingo was out there doing the heavy lifting, and he really looked dangerous. I mean, let's put it this way: I would find a space for Wingo on our team. Okay, so I mean, there's a lot of times I'll look at, and sometimes I break these things down ultimately to that kind of conclusion. Like, hey, would I rather have that guy than the guys we have? I'm not saying I'd rather have Wingo than our receivers. I'm really happy with how our receivers have been playing this year, but I would make space for Wingo on the team. Okay, he's a really good player, and look, Arch on the day, 27 of 43, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 251 yards. I mean, that's a solid day against a really good defense. And I think we can start to say that now. This team is rounding into a really good defense. And things that we've been talking about all year, all season, are coming to fruition now. And I don't think it's just pie in the sky. We've been trying to be objective about it. Yes, I'm a Georgia fan. Yes, you're a Georgia fan. And we want to look at Georgia in the most possible, best possible light. And we're going to defend Georgia to the hilt against people who want to knock us down or try to say something negative. But we all also want to be realistic and say, well, really, what is this team? And we could all see coming into the season, this team didn't start like the 21 or 22 or even the 23 teams, which all started with, top number 1 ranking, sort of undisputed top talent, and, NFL talent oozing everywhere, and just overwhelming people on the field like we've been talking about. Well, that wasn't this team. However, you look at our offensive line, you go back and you pick out all the guys who are playing on offensive line, you look at their recruiting and what was said about them and where they are, and these are all guys that have were players that a lot of people want. Okay, so and they were all highly rated. Maybe not the most highly rated offensive linemen in each class. We haven't necessarily landed the number 1 or number 2 offensive lineman, but everybody who's playing offensive line was a top 150, 180, top 100, top 50 recruit in the country, whether they were all a 4-star up. Everybody on our line is in that category, okay? But a lot of these guys are young, didn't have a lot of experience, and to start the season, a lot of them were hurt. And so we've really seen that line coming together. We've seen the defense, same thing. We were playing up front with, we knew coming into the season that Christian Miller and Jordan Hall hopefully were going to be anchors of the defensive line. We knew that Raylan Wilson and CJ Allen were going to be our key linebackers, and we knew they had immense talent, but thus far they had not been on their own the guys who you hear play in and play out and you start to count on and you say, oh man, where's CJ Allen? I hope he's about to get that guy. Where's Raylan Wilson? We need a play being made. You didn't come into the season knowing that, okay? And as the season's gone on, we've seen that. But look, every team, bad teams have the best guy on their team. Bad defenses have the number 1 tackler on their defense, right? So that's sometimes what can be hard to look through is this guy the number 1 tackler on a bad defense? Or is this guy an NFL talent or a top level college football player and doing a good job. And as the season has emerged, we've seen Raylan Wilson and C.J. Wilson move into, or C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen. We've seen them, as we talked about, emerge into stars and guys that you can count on. You really, I think the pivotal moment was the Auburn fumble. Again, forgetting all the controversy about it, whether the ball broke the plane or not, Raylan Wilson and C.J. Allen both broke on the ball. They identified where the ball was. They punched at the ball. They made a play on the ball. They made that play happen. So if there was some scientific way to prove the ball clipped the line or didn't, whichever, it doesn't matter. I guess my point is they knew what they understood the assignment, right? They knew there was one chance in probably 1 in 99 chance to stop that play from turning into a touchdown and Georgia going down 17-0 in the first half against Auburn. And they made that play. And from that moment on, I think I've really just started to believe in these guys as playmakers, not just guys getting the tackle at some point. Again, you can rack up the number one tackles on a defense. Sometimes that just means you're tackling guys after they rip off 10 yards at a time, right? I mean, somebody's going to tackle them or they're going to score on every play. But no, these guys are stepping up and making plays. Christian Miller has been just stepping up. Again, down linemen and nose guards, people in the center of a defensive line, you don't usually hear a lot about them. They're not there to get sacks and make a lot of big plays. They will once in a while make a big play and get your name called out. Mostly what they're there to do is to occupy as many offensive linemen as possible so that the linebackers and the other guys can make plays. Christian Miller's been doing that all season, and he's doing a great job, and people are noticing. You're hearing his name move up when NFL scouts are talking about guys on this team who are going to play at the next level. And Jordan Hall, who always had that potential, but had been battling injuries his whole time here until he got injured again, unfortunately, in the last game. Until then, Jordan Hall had been that guy too, stepping up and becoming that guy and becoming a leader. These guys are leaders on the defense. But we're seeing guys emerge in the defensive backfield. We're seeing guys emerge at safety. We're seeing plays, and we're seeing more pass rush come along. And so slowly but surely, that was the question. Is this team playing better? Or is this team rounding into a championship team? Did what we see against Mississippi State portend that the team is coming together? It's clearly seemed like, yes, Georgia played its best game of the season against State. But again, is that because State really isn't that good? Is a little overhyped coming into that game? Or is it because Georgia is that good and is now finally putting it together? And now when you see two games back to back, and now against an incredibly talented Texas team. So whatever Texas is, whether Texas should be in the playoffs, whether Texas ever should have been number one, whether Arch Manning was ever a legitimate Heisman candidate or not, Texas is no doubt a team that, again, made it to the semifinals in the playoff last year, won 13 games, what should have been a top 10 team to start the year this year. And by all expectations, is by talent, they are certainly that. And do they have the coaching capability to do that? Yeah, they have coaches who've, again, they've gotten them into those positions before. They've been in the last two playoffs. They were in the last 14 playoff. They were in the first 12-team playoff. This is a perennial playoff team now. I guess we can say it. We can stop making the jokes. Hey, Texas is back. So Texas is back, but as somebody said, as people were saying on both Game Day and SEC Nation, and I tried to watch both. I love Game Day, but hey, SEC Nation was on Myers Quad, and they were there mostly just to focus on our game. I think Game Day made a decision that makes a lot of sense to people outside the SEC to feature, not just keep going to the same SEC schools all the time. And they've got a perception problem, right? If they just keep going to the big SEC game every week, people are going to look at their relationship with the SEC network and their broadcast deal and say, look, they're just shilling for the SEC. So I think they made a move to try to say, hey, look, we're not just shilling for the SEC. We're going to go to the Pittsburgh Notre Dame game. On paper, Pittsburgh was a team that, somebody has to, like I'm talking about rankings. When you get down and you're trying to fill out number 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, somebody's got to be in there, right? But there's really not that much difference between, when you look at teams that at least are having a decent season and a winning record, there's not that much difference between the team that's in the rankings and out of the rankings there. So Pittsburgh was out of the rankings before last week, but they moved up. They were the next team with a good enough looking record. They only had 2 losses. They came into the week 7-2. So guess what? They get put in the bottom of the top 25. They probably bounce right out of the bottom of the top 25 this week because they not only lost, they pretty much got blown out at home by Notre Dame. And I don't think Notre Dame is quite as awesome as a lot of the media is making them out to be. But look, Notre Dame also made it to the college football championship game last year. They beat us. They have legitimate talent. They've got a coach that knows what they're doing. They are a well-run, well-coached program, and they are a legitimate top 25, top 15 playoff level team right now. So do they have all the pieces to win a championship? No. I mean, they beat us with defense and us making mistakes, but they were offensively, like I've said many a time, not impressive, and that came back to haunt them. Their lack of balance as a team, their lack of answers. I like to look at it sometimes as, do you have an answer for whatever comes up in the game? You know, your chances of winning big matchups against other highly rated teams are going to be affected by what can you do. Do you have the tools in the toolbox to respond? You don't necessarily have to do it all the time. You don't have to be one of the top offensive teams in the country to win a shootout. But if you get in a shootout game, do you have enough talent and players on offense that you could play a shootout game with somebody if that's how the flow of the game went? And the answer for Notre Dame last year was no. They couldn't have won a shootout against anybody. That just wasn't how they played. They were a grinded out quarterback, get tough yards, one or two guys catch a pass once in a while, kind of like old school throwback team with a killer defense. A lot of talent on offensive line, a lot of talent on defense. That's what they were last year. This year, they're a little more dynamic offensively, a little less impressive defensively. But so are they still a top 25 team? Yes. But being grafted in, as I was saying last week, or last couple podcasts, being grafted into the number 9 position, I don't know about that. I mean, they don't have the resume for it. And I'm not a big believer in counting close losses as a big resume. I still think in the end, you lost, even if it was to a highly ranked team. I don't think we deserve credit because we lost what was before this week, the number 4 team in the country, Alabama. I think you can look at that and say, look, they lost a game. Here's all these teams that have no losses at the top of the rankings, teams with 1 losses in the next, and teams with 2 losses the next. And it doesn't have to be that rigid, right? If we're being really a thoughtful and insightful college football analysts, if we're being good fans and we look at it, we can recognize, look, maybe a 2-loss team is actually better than an undefeated team. If that undefeated team has literally played nobody and they don't really have those kind of credentials, then, a 2-loss team that's beaten 3 top 25 teams but lost to a couple top 10 teams in close losses, maybe that 2-loss team is better than a undefeated team that's played nobody, or better than a 1-loss team that has 1 good win on its schedule or no good win on its schedule. Again, Oregon's a legitimate power team, right? They've been in the playoff. They won the Big Ten last year, and they're in a nice position this year with an elite record. But they've lost the only game they've played against a top 10, top 15 team this season. And they weren't really that close. They lost by 10 at home to Indiana. So otherwise, they don't even have a win against a top 25 team. I guess they beat Iowa, who was in the top 20 coming in this week. So again, the zero-sum nature, I keep talking about football. If Iowa's in the 20s and they beat them when the rankings come out and we get to see it, maybe Iowa's no longer in the rankings now because they lost and they're going to get bounced out of the rankings. It just depends. At some point, there starts to be a little balancing at the bottom of the rankings because everybody, again, everybody from 1 to 25 is not going to have 1 loss. By the time you get down to the bottom of the top 25, by the end of the season, you're looking at teams with 3, 4, and 5 losses. Sometimes you see teams that are number 24 in the rankings, in the final rankings. They were 8 and 5 on the season. So maybe they lost a couple of those games to highly ranked teams. Maybe they beat a couple top 25 teams. So they're worthy, even though they have 5 losses. We're heading that way. We're rounding out. There's only 2 or 3 games left in the season. I guess 2 games left for most teams. We have 2 games left. We'll be back in Sanford Stadium to play Charlotte. And Charlotte is and so I'll just tell you now, the podcast this week, we're not going to spend hardly any time, a little bit like we did earlier in the season. This is a good time to look at other things because there's no reason to do any breakdown or analysis of Charlotte. Charlotte, by the standards of a group of 5 teams or small division teams or small, whatever you want to call them, teams, Charlotte's not even good among those teams. Charlotte lost yesterday to go 1-9 so far in the season. So even amongst their peers, they're bad. Okay. And so they have to come to Sanford Stadium. I'm not even sure what to hope or expect out of that. I mean, I was thinking about it. I was looking at Gunner's stats and thinking, where's he going to finish? And when you compare to a full season body of work and to points I was going to make to share with you today and over the next couple of days, I was looking at it and trying to think. And I thought about the Charlotte game, and I was like, do I even want Gunner to play in that game at all? And I was like, I guess you got to suit up and go play every week to stay sharp. I don't want him to get hurt. But I was thinking to myself, he might maybe get 100. If he gets more than 150 yards in the game, and that's because that better be because he throws 3 passes and they all go for 70-yard touchdowns, or that's really it. I mean, that's the only reason I want to see Gunner have more than 150 yards passing next week is because he throws 3 long touchdowns and he racks up that many yards. Other than that, he doesn't need to be in the game any longer than that. Whatever it takes to get a few passes, complete a few passes, get a touchdown or 2, get warmed up, go through the routine, and then go sit down. This should be a week to see Ryan Puglisi play. Maybe Ryan Montgomery gets on the field. A lot of young guys get to play. Guys who've been hurt. Everybody should get a chance to sharpen up, play a little bit, pad some stats, and then get out there and let other people play. Because surely our 3rd and 4th team players should be able to beat Charlotte by a profound score. So that's just a word on that. And the reason we talk about that now is just to say, look, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that game. We're not going to break it down or talk about it much. So what we're going to talk about for the next week and a half plus now, or all of this week until we get to next week. Once we get after this time next week, once we're in past Saturday of next week, then we're going to have what we hope is a huge game to talk about. I mean, it's already a huge game. Look, Georgia Tech survived a close game against Boston College. They were on the road, and so they had to come from being like 10 or more down again. But they did. They got it done. They got the win. And so now there's a chance, and I did not look. I should look. I don't remember. I don't know what Georgia Tech is doing for the rest of their season. Let's take a look real quick. Hold on. Let's pull it up. Okay. Oh, they have to play Pitt. So they survived Boston College and won by 2 on the road. So they now are at 9-1. High cotton for Georgia Tech. They're still going to be in the teens. They're going to be somewhere between 12 and 15 probably in all the forms of rankings when they come out. And that's fantastic. And so we need them to beat Pittsburgh because no matter what happens, I know it's fun to laugh at your rivals, laugh at Georgia Tech, and it'd be kind of fun to think about how their expectations get all high and then they fall flat. Well, if that's going to happen, let's have that happen by Georgia beating the snot out of them. But let's have them come into the game as highly ranked. Hey, ACC, they're heading to the ACC championship. That's even going to be more fun, right? Like if they end up winning the ACC, hey, we beat the ACC champion down by whatever. That'll be great. Now, there's no reason to suspect it's going to be a beatdown, okay? Last year's team played really strong down the course of the season. Last year's Georgia team I'm talking about, we beat a Tennessee team pretty soundly in Sanford Stadium late in the season before they went on to play in the playoffs. Not very well against Ohio State, but and then we got to that Georgia Tech game. We all know what happens. That we fell behind again, big hole, and Georgia Tech got out to a lead. We got it tied at the end, and then we had the eight overtime epic thriller. So a lot of times you look at these things and you think, look, Tech is progressing. They've gotten better each of the last couple seasons. Last year they were 7-6 team. They're 9-1 already this year, so they are progressing. Now the good news is maybe Georgia is progressing. Maybe Georgia is a better team now than Georgia was at this time last year. So if we both progressed, but either way, and just because they played a state overtimes doesn't mean that that's what am I trying to say? Just because we went to 8 overtimes doesn't mean, and they're getting better, doesn't mean, okay, well, last year they just barely lost. This year they're going to win. That's not how these things work. It's not quantitative that way, right? So we'll have to see. We'll have to see what the flow of the game is. But generally speaking, what I'm talking about is we want to see a big-time matchup. The Charlotte game is going to be just a practice session, and it's going to be nice. It's going to help us pad stats. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the impact of where these games are and how your season rounds out and what you look like on paper at the end, and this game's going to matter, right? The fact that most SEC teams hold one of these practice games to the end of the season and we don't put them all in the beginning does affect how our stats look during the season. You'll see a lot of the SEC teams are not up there at the top. I mean, we might be in the upper third, top 20 of a lot of the key stats, but sometimes we're not right up in that top 10 or 15, but sometimes we jump up in there because you get this game against Charlotte. So now you have a chance we were talking about yardage differential before this game. I was sharing with you that, and some of the other metrics that you use to kind of try to look behind the hood on these teams and say, well, what are these teams? What is our team? What kind of team are we? That's kind of where I came to believe that we would win this game against Texas by 2 or more scores. I looked at the numbers and I said, look, Georgia is an improving team, and the team is a little better the way we're actually performing than our perception has been. Texas is just the opposite. Texas has a little more perception coming into the game against Georgia of accomplishment than they were showing when you really dug into the metrics. And so to me, I looked at that and I see Georgia trending higher behind the scenes a little bit, and with a perspective that people have that I think is a little off. Texas a little over, and again, still sort of carrying, to be honest, that perspective of preseason number 1, even though they bounced all the way out of the poll. Again, they really didn't do much. They go all the way out of the top 25 when they lose to Florida. And then within 4 weeks, they're all the way back up to number 10. And basically they had one significantly good game in that time span. They beat Oklahoma in the Red River rivalry, and they beat them soundly, 23-6. So that was a great game. They beat a top 10, top 15 team. Oklahoma obviously is a good team, just went on the road and did something we couldn't do on the road or at home, which is beat Alabama. Okay, so we got to give Oklahoma credit, and you got to give Texas credit for beating them, because Texas beat Oklahoma, but Oklahoma wasn't full strength either, right? And we've been talking about this all season. This is the era we're back in. None of these teams can have the kind of talent where you can survive the fact that Oklahoma has a great defense, and then really their offense is built around John Mateer, their quarterback. Very Gunner-like guy. Or he's not just like Gunner, but he's a guy who just makes stuff happen. He wills stuff. He can make some throws. He can make some passes. But probably one of the bigger games plays in the Alabama game. I watched a lot of that game leading into it. Leading into our game, and one of the early plays that was a big difference maker is John Mateer ripping off a 20-yard touchdown up the middle, spinning and bouncing off people and going right over the middle of the end zone and scoring a touchdown. They helped extend at that time the Oklahoma lead, which again they'd eventually win the game. Alabama would eventually come all the way back and take the lead, but they weren't able to hold it. And, at some point I might speak to that. I think the whole Kalen DeBoer, I thought there was something really interesting. And I've told you before, I watch Alabama football pretty closely, not just because I'm a sports junkie, I'm an SEC junkie, college football junkie, and I'll watch anybody play. But my wife went to Alabama, and so I spent a lot of years. I've been to a bunch of Alabama games as a fan, as hey, our family is there, taking our kids to Alabama games and dressed them up even in girls in Alabama cheerleader costumes. They had Georgia cheerleader costumes and Alabama cheerleader costumes when they were young. So we've been down that route. So I have a strong connection to Alabama, and I feel I want to beat them as a Georgia fan in the worst way because of what's happened in the last 10, 15 years and the way we've lost out on these championships. I want to earn our place in history. We are already, in my mind, the second best team in the history of the SEC, but I keep saying it's unequivocal that Alabama is the best team, and so I want to keep making inroads to that. Every time we beat them, every time we win an SEC championship, every time we've already, over the last few years, we have overtaken Alabama for the best record in the country in the last 5 years. The best record in the SEC goes with being in the country. So we're closing in on the 10-year record. Alabama, if you look at the last 10 years, still has a little better record than Georgia over the last 10 years. We're closing in on that. We got another win yesterday. They got a loss. It's evening up. We're getting closer and closer. So we're making inroads. Georgia won the last 2 national championships. It's been longer since Alabama won a national championship. So Georgia's won the most recent SEC championship. It's been longer since Alabama's won one. So right now, Georgia has that edge in the current, but that's just been the last 3 to 5 years, even including the fact that Alabama's won all the head-to-head matchups in that time span. So nonetheless, anyway, back to my key point. We were talking about Tech. We're talking about the end of the season game. So we're looking for Tech to go out and beat Pittsburgh, who's probably not going to be a top 25 team. They were 22nd coming into the weekend, and they lost badly to Notre Dame. And Notre Dame just sort of solidified that they can beat top 25 teams or close to top 25 teams that are not the elite teams. The 2 higher level teams they played this year, they've lost. So I think that's where Notre Dame is. I think Notre Dame fits the mantra of you are what your record says you are. So I think they're a solid top 25 team, but within that, they're also a team that hasn't really been able to beat the elites. Their one win in recent memory against an elite team was beating us in the playoffs last year, and that still bugs me. And it still bugs me too, because that was the first time Notre Dame has, in the history of Notre Dame and Georgia football, beaten Georgia. So again, like I was talking about these records, about the Texas game, this is only our 8th game against Texas, but we've only played 4 against Notre Dame all time. So, but we're 3-1 now all time against Notre Dame. Could be 4-0 though. So just didn't pull it together last year. So let's get back on track. Talk about where we're going. So Tech's got to play Pitt. We're going to play Charlotte. So we're going to get to 10-1. Tech is already at 9-1, and so we need Tech to beat Pittsburgh and bring a colossal matchup to TV, to the national viewing audience. Georgia is already one of the most watched teams in the country. People are buying into the Georgia brand. Most of the top watched games in college football this season have involved Georgia, or several of them have. And I haven't heard what the ratings were on Texas. Funny story, though, you might have seen it. AJC was reporting today, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that the Ben Epps Athens Airport was setting a record for the most flights in its 100-year history this weekend. So all these rich Texas boosters and the Texas team, I guess, chartered their flights with their cheerleaders and their band and the players and the coaches and everything straight to Ben Epps. And they brought a lot of alumni and influential boosters and people with them, and I guess they got a lot of rich alumni. You saw Matthew McConaughey was at the game last night. So I would assume now Peyton Manning, I don't know how far he has to come from. He was at the game with his son, and so I'm not sure, but Matthew McConaughey lives over in Texas, so I imagine Matthew McConaughey just chartered a flight straight to Athens. So all these guys who have that kind of capability chartered planes right in. I guess Ben Epps normally can handle, or might handle, up to 60 flights a day in a busy day, and apparently they were up to 160 over this big weekend with Texas in town. And the last time it was this busy was back when Notre Dame came to town, back in 17, 18, 19, whatever year. I think it was 19. I think we played there in 17, and they played in Sanford Stadium in 2019. So big money boosters from teams that haven't really been to Athens. I hope that, as a side note, that the Texas fans got a good show. Georgia, Austin is definitely up there in the other great cities with, where UT is Austin is known as one of the great towns in the country to go visit. Lots of culture, lots of music, lots of everything. Austin's also a bigger city already. I mean, it's whereas Athens is kind of glommed onto the outskirts of Atlanta and sort of connects to Atlanta and is part of Metro Atlanta now, really, but is also still its own little town and feels like its own little town. Austin is really just its own city and is sort of a much bigger thing than Athens. So I'm not sure it's a fair comparison. Athens is truly a college town. Everything is influenced and driven by the University of Georgia, and then the culture that's built up in Athens. And even though Athens is sort of glommed onto the edge of Metro Atlanta, Athens is still its own little thing. But anyway, I hope that the folks from Austin got a good show of what it's like to see. I saw a picture. I saw that the Georgia Theater, I guess, had the marquee up. All right, horns down. So, good job, everybody, speaking out to the Texas fans. Anyway, I hope Texas enjoyed their time and came to find what a great town Athens is. We know what they felt about the game. So, I guess we can be nice and gracious and hope they enjoyed our hospitality and hope they enjoyed town. Let's get to a few other points. So Tech needs to win the game. We need to get to the big Thanksgiving, Friday night or Friday afternoon showdown. And this needs to be, I'd like to see Tech make it all the way up in the top 10, have another top 10 showdown. And Georgia, win or lose, look, we're in the playoffs. That's the other thing. So here, what are the headlines? Let's recap for a minute, kind of all over the place, right? So what are the headlines? Number one, Dogs win, Dogs win, Dogs win. Okay, so that was fantastic, and we are excited. And that's so we've beaten Texas now for the third time in 13 months. I think we've thoroughly introduced Texas into their new slot in the SEC. You got Alabama and Georgia, the heavyweights of the SEC. You got other teams like LSU, Florida, Auburn, all that have a say in Tennessee, all who've historically had a say in who wins and loses in the SEC. And Texas and Oklahoma want to come in and be right up there in that top elite part of the conference, where they're right up there with Georgia and Alabama. Well, Texas may have beaten Alabama 2 seasons ago at Alabama. They weren't even in the conference back then. They haven't beaten an elite traditional SEC team yet, because really they've only had one opportunity, and they've 3 times had a crack at Georgia, and they're not getting it done. We beat them thoroughly at home. And all these games have flowed very similar, by the way. Although Texas actually was the SEC championship game was a little more even. They had kind of the edge in the beginning of the game. They were slightly ahead at the half, as you may remember, and then they ultimately had a lead, and then we had to tie it up, take it to overtime, our second overtime game in a row, coming off of the overtime game with Tech, like I was talking about, and then we won it there at the end in overtime. So that game was a little closer, the SEC championship game. The game at Texas last year, in this game, had a very similar vibe in a way, or sort of a similar flow. Georgia played lights out on defense in that game, had just sacked both Ewers and Arch Manning in the game, caused a lot of problems, created turnovers, ran the ball down Texas's throat from their own side of the field, and jumped up to whatever, I think it was a 24-0 lead in the game, 23, 21-0, something like that. And then, of course, Texas was able to rally. They got the interception. There was the controversial call, which I still think was pass interference. I still don't know why that was so clear. It looked to me like the Texas guy grabs our receiver on the route. Yes, they both start pushing and shoving after that, but I think it was initiated by the Texas cornerback who grabs Arian Smith as he's making his route. And you can't grab a guy 20 yards downfield in a route. You can't put two arms on a guy. To me, that once you put two arms on a guy and grab, that's pass interference, no matter what else happens. The fact that Arian Smith then pushed and they fought, that, I don't know why they picked up the flag on that after they called it. But the Texas fans got mad. You know the whole story, brought through the bottles, game delayed, all that fiasco. In the end, they are credited with the interception. They get the ball deep in our territory. They punch the ball into the end zone. They cut into the lead. They make it close. And then ultimately, we deny them the chance to score anymore. It wasn't quite the same because in that game, I guess we were up 23-0, I think is what it was. Now that I think about it, because I think then what we did is we scored a touchdown in the second half. We had one touchdown in the second half. We put the game back up to 30-15 because at one point it had been 23-15. So they were close, but the defense clamped back down. Other than giving them the ball deep in our possession on the interception, in the game there last year and having them pull within a score, their offense never did anything else. Our defense was just solid all the way through, and eventually our offense put together another drive, put down a score, put the game back out by a 2-score game, and we won 30-15. And that was a game where it could have been a much bigger blowout than it was. This game kind of flowed the same way. We jumped out early, defense was great, got pressure, put took Texas behind the 8 ball, and I think we all felt it. We all felt like the blowout was imminent, or should be, because we had the ball multiple times. A little bit like the Alabama game where we had the ball 3 times in the second half with a chance to tie or take the lead, never did it. We had the ball up 14-3, 3, 4, 5 times in this game where one more score, even a field goal, would have made it 17-3, and it would have just felt daunting. I mean, it's still just a 14-point game or a 2-score game, but it felt like it would have made a big difference. And if any of those drives we had been able to just we had the ball 5 times. So if we get just a field goal, if we just score on 2 of the 5 and just a field goal and a touchdown, so 10 more points, right, before Texas has a chance to do anything, then the score would have been 24-3. You would have felt like the game was effectively over. And if we'd actually scored a couple times and just kept, score every other time and just kept moving the ball, we drive a little bit, then punt. The next time we go down, we score and drive. Normal flow of game could have easily just been a blowout, right? We could have been to 35-10 by the time heading into the third quarter. And that's where it felt like it should have been. So, but Texas fought back. And to their credit, I'm going to say I saw the talent on display. Their defense stepped up and made a statement, said, we are not just going to fall. We're not going to give up, and we're not just going to collapse. And I know a lot of you may want to complain and talk about what happened. There's always the temptation to rip on Bobo. And so let me just say, relative to Bobo, I think Bobo had a great game. And I don't disparage the idea at all that those first 2 drives that we got when we were up 14-3, we tried to run up the middle. Yeah, we did. I hear that all the time. Bobo runs up the middle. Well, you know what? That's the time. You've dominated the game. Defense is playing great. You've gotten to a 2-score lead. That's the moment to start shortening the game and taking the air out of the game and just deflating the other team by ramming the ball down their throat. And this has been a team this year compared to the last couple seasons where Georgia has been able to do that. Our line is playing well. Our running backs are playing Well, it felt like this is the time where you try to just jam the ball down their throat, have one of those. And Georgia, we love to make that statement. Okay, we've jumped you early, we got a lead. Now we're going to do like an 11 play, 9 running up the middle play drive where we just ram it down your throat, take 8 minutes off the clock. We're going to go up 3 scores, and you're going to feel like you've been down 10 scores because we're just going to beat the snot out of you in this duet. That's what we tried to do. And to Texas's credit, they stepped up, stuffed the run, and so all of a sudden, for the first time in the game, we ended up in 3rd and long because we got nothing out of our first couple plays, and that's Texas. They did a good job. Okay, and second drive, we tried it again. Like, hey, let's get back on that. It didn't work. I mean, we only ran the 3 plays and punted, so then we try it again. Run 3 plays. Same thing. Texas stuffs us. They get us in 3rd and long again. We have to punt. So this feels bad, and I mean, we all were complaining about it, but to Bobo's credit, the 3rd time we got the ball, we opened up with a nice first down pass and got a first down, moved up the field, got to, around midfieldish or at least, our side of the 40 or something like that. I'm not looking right at the stats. And we started moving, but then again, bogged down. Texas's defense stepped up. We made some mistakes, but they stepped up and they said, we are not going to get blown out of this game. We're going to give our team a chance. And it worked because then eventually they get the interception. They get deep into our territory, and that was a legitimate pass interference call. Looked like it didn't need to be made, unfortunately. Zion Branch, Zachariah's brother, in coverage. I think if he didn't touch the guy, the pass was errant. It was one of Arch's not better throws, and so it would have been a big stop. And Texas would have had to decide if they want to go for a long 4th down or go ahead and take the field goal. Would have felt like a big victory on the interception to have just made them go to the field goal and still be up. Still only up 1 score, 8, but 14-3 on the scoreboard. I mean, 14-6 on the scoreboard looks a lot better than 14-10. At 14-10, I think we all felt the same pressure. Hey, we put a lot of effort in this game. We've been dominating this game, and we're not very ahead. And frankly, if we don't score the next time we have the ball, and they do score the next time they have the ball, we're going to be behind. If they score a touchdown. So it felt like a huge opportunity lost. And I think we all felt that. And I think we all felt deflated by that. So, but I'm going to put most of that on Texas. I'm going to give Texas credit for that before I'm going to beat us up and make a big thing about saying, look, we really blew that. So, okay, we're going to pause here.